Seguimos con nuestro Congreso de Bienestar y tengo el honor de presentarles a nuestro siguiente invitado, Dat Phan. Ordenado por el maestro Thich Nhat Hanh en 1998, Dat dejó la túnica monástica. Desde el 2008, su trabajo ha llevado el mindfulness a distintos ámbitos de la sociedad, la educación, las organizaciones y la salud. Trabaja estrechamente con científicos, psicoterapeutas, médicos, líderes y profesores para crear un espíritu de unidad y cooperación destinado a concienciar a la sociedad. Dat creó un programa nacional de mindfulness para empresas en Francia, formando a más de 3.000 personas en 20 ciudades diferentes entre el 2011 y el 2014. Le apasiona compartir un enfoque integral del mindfulness basado en la autocomprensión y en los 4 dominios de la psicología profunda: la ética aplicada, las estructuras sociales, la ecología y la no dualidad. Es cofundador del Cèdres Bleus, espero haberlo dicho bien, un centro de mindfulness en Francia y autor de varios libros. Los y las dejo con Dat Phan.
Okay, dear friends, welcome to my presentation. The topic of the presentation is on conscious evolution and crossing to the other shore. I would like to begin with a poem that will bring homage to South America, Chile, of a poem by Pablo Neruda, and it's called Keeping Quiet. So now we will count to 12, and we will all keep still. For once on the face of the earth, let's not speak in any language. Let's stop for 1 second and not move our arms so much. It will be an exotic moment, without rush, without engines. We would all be together in a sudden strangeness. Fishermen in the cold sea would not have harm whales, and the man gathering salt would look at his hurt hands. Those who prepare green wars, wars with gas, wars with fire, victory with no survivors, would put on clean clothes and walk about with their brothers in the shade, doing nothing. What I want should not be confused with total inactivity. Life is what is here. I want no affair with death. If we were not so single-minded about keeping our lives moving, and for once could do nothing, perhaps a huge silence might interrupt this sadness of never understanding ourselves and of threatening ourselves with death. Perhaps the earth can teach us, as when everything seems dead and later proves to be alive. Now I'll count up to 12, and you can keep quiet, and I will go. I wanted to start with this poem because it's really, although it was written many years ago by the poet and writer Pablo Neruda, it still echoes within our time. I wanted to share you on the theme of conscious evolution because for a long time we have been evolving as human beings, where we arrived to the stage of Homo sapiens sapien. And I'm wondering, is this the end of our species? As we know that we have different calamities or crises of our time, this is the intention of a congress like this, to educate, to inform, so we can be more aware of the direction we're going. But a conscious evolution, for me, it entails asking very deep questions. The most fundamental one is, who am I? As different crises are manifesting in our society, ecological, economical, existential, we know that our system is reaching a brink, and we know that what we call the American dream is dead. But we cannot go on copying a system that produces more suffering than it does well-being. So the question is, how do we understand ourselves to become more conscious human beings? And it involves asking deep questions. How much do I understand my body? How much do I understand my emotions, my thoughts? And what is the self in relationship with the world, with the environment? So it invites us to complicate a division between what we call the individual and collective. And there's different terms that have been used in economy that expresses this. In the early 19th century, we have a term called the tragedy of the commons, which means what's good for one group may be a detriment to another, and what's good to another group will be a detriment of a larger group, maybe the nation, and what's good for one nation could be a detriment to other nations, and what's good to all the nation could be a detriment of our ecology, of our planet. So it's based on this idea that we have unlimited desires and we live in a world with very limited resources. So we're on the brink of asking very deep, fundamental questions that can change our world view. And I think for a long time, our view was based on expansion and individualism. And this sort of view has produced many positive elements like democracy and free thinking. But at the same time, the shadow elements has produced a lot of maybe limitations, as we think that we have only one life. Sometimes we don't think of future generations. And we call this the tragedy of the commons because it's sort of a lack of awareness on part of the majority that causes the suffering. This is not a new theme. In the Buddhist philosophy, the Buddha, he speaks about the world being on fire. And he said there's a shore of ill-being that is here. And we are all contributing to the shore of ill-being. And it's on fire with fear, greed, hatred, confusion, and suffering. And how do we cross to the other shore of well-being? This is something that every individual and every collective is concerned about. I go back to this poem because I think one of the essential things is, do we know how to be quiet? How to reconnect to the present moment? Do we know how to be present? Do we know how to listen to ourselves? One of the suffering of this vision lies in deep-seated perceptions that may be wrong of our reality and ourselves. Our Western world is very much influenced by different psychological view of the world. The first is influenced by Jean-René Descartes, when he said, "Je pense, donc je suis," which means I think, therefore I am. And with this realization, for the first time, I think in Western modern society, we separated the mind and the body. The mind and the body becomes two different entities, and this is where the first sickness begins. We know in our society, in France, the major drugs that's being sold on the market is la somnifère, sleeping pills. Many of us have problems sleeping. we cannot go to sleep because we think too much. And this is one of the era of Descartes, because we know now with the neuroscience, modern medicine, that the mind and body are connected and we cannot separate the two. But somehow in our society we live with this separation. And this has caused very deep existential crisis in our world because we are not really present. There have been many research done on this fragmentation of the mind and body. And we know that the first act that we want to keep quiet is to bring our mind and body together. I was wondering if we can do that as a collective right now as we continue this voyage on what is a conscious evolution. I invite you just to bring your mind back to the present moment, and I invite us to listen to the sound of the bell. The sound of the bell will help you bring your mind and body together. And you can simply bring your attention to the awareness of your body and your breath. Keeping quiet is not something that our society have been conditioned to do. There is a Zen story we like to share in the tradition that shares about a man on a horse. And this man on a horse is riding down the street. And another person sees the man on a horse and asks him, "Where are you going?" And the man on the horse says, "I don't know. Ask the horse." And this is an image of the individual and a society. We don't know where the horse is going, and we don't know where we are going. And the invitation, if we want to live more consciously, is to first bring our mind back to our body. And we can do this of what we call a practice of mindfulness. Mindfulness is the capacity to be present. And it's something that science has shown everyone can do. And it has a lot of mental, physical, and emotional benefits. There was a French philosopher called Blaise Pascal. And he shared the problem with man is he cannot sit in a room by himself for 2 minutes alone doing nothing. Again, this invites us back to the contemplation of Pablo Neruda. What exactly is doing nothing? It doesn't mean that we're inactive, but it means our mind has stopped running. Many of us are running. This is why we are sick. This is why our society is sick. This is why Mother Earth is suffering. Mother Earth is crying for our help. We've been running. Either some of us run to the past, and others run towards the future, and others run in the present. We can't stop like a horse. So if we cannot really stop, we cannot really listen, and we cannot really see or hear or feel or smell or touch, we all have an appointment with one thing. We all have an appointment with the present moment. Life can only be found in the present moment. And if you miss your appointment with the present moment, you miss your appointment with life. This is why most of us are not happy. We're running and we're consuming products that tells us what we lack to be happy. There's a big lack in us. That's why we are greedful. And we cannot stop running, we're never satisfied. But when we stop, we can come back. We can come back to the wonders of life. In the poem Pablo Neruda, he said we can wear our Sunday clothes and walk as brothers and sisters on this earth. I studied with one of the great Zen masters of our time, Zen master Dat Phan, who was a friend of Dr. Martin Luther King of the Civil Rights Movement in America. And Dr. King, he said something very important, a message to humanity. He said either we can die like fools with each other, or either we can walk hand in hand like brothers and sisters. And this is where we are at this moment out of our time. We live in a society when everything is separated. We have created a certain structure when everything remains what we call ivory towers, where there's specialists in every domain, but who is really working together to solve problems locally, on a local level, on a community level, on a national level, and a world level. Many of these problems cannot be solved because we're not looking in the same direction. So the first part of a conscious evolution is already to bring our mind back to our body, to become aware of the present moment. We know that our society is evolving. We know sometimes when there is suffering, there seems to be no answer, hopeless. And what I've learned through my different dialogue with different people in different fields, for example, in biology, we know since the 70s, before the 70s, we spoke about evolution as in selfish genes, only the strongest will survive. But during the 70s, the biologists, they started to understand that it's not the selfish genes that will survive, will thrive, but it's the genes that are able to work in group. And we know through evolution of selection and replication and adaptation that in order for us to really grow within a family, within a group, within a company, within a nation, there needs to be this coherence within the group. And this is very important when we want to evolve consciously. We are now living in a time where we are very evolved globally. We live in a very global-centric reality. But many of us are still living in a very small way in our egocentric, ethnocentric views. And if we do not broaden our view to catch up with technology and science, then it's like we live in a very global-centric world in a very egocentric, ethnocentric way. And this is also a recipe for disaster. How do views change? Throughout our modern times, we have had different views, and that has helped humanity to evolve. We know before Copernicus that many of people in the Western world believed the world was the center of the universe. And with the Copernicus, with the heliocentric view of the universe, it permits us to broaden our vision of reality. And we want to get for a conscious evolution to take place, we need to get as close as reality as possible. And we know early in the 20th century with Einstein, he also challenged our view of the world. For a long time, we have been living in a Newtonian view of the world that's based on time, space, and matter. And Einstein's theory of relativity showed us that time, space, matter was a continuum. And that helped us usher us into our modernity. But I think our wisdom traditions that somehow in our secular world we have thrown out the baby with the bathwater, we say, shared some very deep views of reality that we can learn from. Take, for example, our indigenous people saw Mother Earth as an organism. La terre mère, la tierra madre. And with this wisdom, their civilization have lasted for a long time. And we can honor, we can hold that, and we can learn from this wisdom. The philosopher Spinoza, he echoed the same wisdom, saying that the earth is just one organism. And in Buddhist philosophy, what we try to see is the nature of reality. What is the nature of reality? The first question we ask is, who am I? Who am I? I have a body, I have emotions, I have thinking. These are the things I should be aware of if I want to evolve consciously. The second aspect is, what is reality? Have we ever really stopped to observe our world and the characteristics that we live in? If you stop, like the poem invites you to do, you will begin to see that reality is always changing. The nature of life is change. And it's something that our identity, our ego, have a very difficult time accepting. We have a very difficult time accepting old age, sickness, death, change, because it brings about what we call existential anguish. But reality is always changing. We are also always changing. It's thanks to this change that the spring flowers can bloom. It's thanks to this change that we can change a government. It's thanks to this change that we can change our habits, our lifestyle, from ignorance to wisdom. Change is happening at every moment, at every level. But somehow in our daily lives, we live in a way that nothing will change. This is a sort of illusion from the conscious perspective. If we look close to the face of what reality is, we see that it's also what we call interconnected, that everything is woven together. Reality is like a fabric, more like less like separate entities or islands. Let us contemplate together this piece of paper. If I ask you, what do you see? Most of us, with our perception, will say, I see a piece of paper. But when you're conscious, when you stop and when you can look, you can see deeper into the nature of the paper. In this paper, there's the sunshine, there's the cloud, there's the rain, there's the forest, there's Mother Earth, there's the lumber man that cut down the tree, there's his mother, there's his society. We can say if we remove just one element from this paper, it cannot exist. Everything is coexisting, co-manifesting together. This is a view of a reality in Buddhist philosophy we call interbeing. Interbeing is able to penetrate into an object and to see that the one is in the many and the many is in the one. It's similar to the verses of the poet William Blake when he says, to see eternity in an hour and the universe in a grain of sand. We cannot see this with our physical eyes. We see this with our awareness, with our consciousness. And from this seeing, in Buddhist philosophy, we say great compassion arises. And for a conscious evolution to take place, we be able to need to balance different energies. The energy of fear, we need love. The energy of suffering, we need compassion. The energy of sadness, we need joy. And the energy of confusion, we need serenity, we need peace. But how many of us in our individual lives and our companies cultivate peace? If there's really one work that we can be inspired to do, it's what we call the peace work. And in order to do the peace work, we say we have to be peace. If our life is full of chaos, confusion, if we're running all the time, how do we create a peaceful world? So conscious evolution is something that we're going towards. We want to go from the shore of ill-being to the shore of well-being. But where is this shore? Is it somewhere else in the future? Is it somewhere else in space and time? Where exactly is this shore? This shore, we say, is the state of mind. The shore of ill-being is here, but the shore of well-being is always here. And it's a matter of which shore do we choose to be on. In this conscious evolution, I feel that not one discipline, not one ideology will answer, but it's going to take a collective awakening, a collective intelligence. And this is also a part of evolution. We know that in our human evolution, human beings evolved in the small groups, within the family, within the community, and within the environment, we evolved. And somehow we have put our energy, our investment in bigger things, institutions, government bodies, corporation that have somehow is not responding to the crisis of our time. I feel the answer is within the community. I feel the answer is within the small group. There have been many studies done on this, notably by a Nobel Peace Prize economist. Her name is Elinor Ostrom, who won the Nobel Peace Prize in economy, the first woman in economics that based economics in her view of evolution. And these are what we call the 7 principles of evolution. So what I encourage us to look at, to contemplate on, is am I evolving, consciously evolving as an individual, as a group, as a society, as a nation? And it brings us to this simplicity. Somehow we've forgotten about simplicity in this complex world. somehow we've forgotten about beauty. We've forgotten about living happily in the present moment in a world that encourages us to run somewhere in the future. And it's our birthright, and it's also our responsibility, not only for ourselves, but generations to come, to begin applying these conscious principles wherever we are. We talk about different forms of well-being, but for me, it has a source. All these branches of well-being we're exploring in this Congress has one source, and it is the human heart. The human heart in the Zen tradition is something that is indestructible. It's something that cannot die. In life we can take many things away from the human being. We can take away our material possession. You can have your status taken away from you. You can have many things taken away from you. But when you're in touch with these aspects of love, of compassion, joy and serenity, your heart cannot be taken away. And somehow in our mechanical, electronical evolution, it seems that we lost touch with the human heart. Many of us would like to travel. We like to travel to different countries, different land, to see something new. In the Buddhist mythology, there was a god that wanted to travel, and he could travel the speed of light. And this god, his name is Ishvara, he had traveled across the universe many times and back. He has seen all the galaxies. And one day he arrived back on Earth and he asked, I've seen everything. What haven't I seen? What haven't I visited? And somebody told him to go see the Buddha. And he asked the Buddha the question, is the universe infinite or not infinite? Because I think I have traveled all across the universe. And the Buddha, he said, that's very good. You have traveled very far, but you have not traveled to one place, I think, in your life. That is the present moment. That is to your heart. And he said the longest voyage that we would take in our life is this voyage from the head to the heart. So this is what I would like to share to you for this. I don't really consider what I'm sharing as a presentation or a conference, but we're just having a sharing from a human to human, heart to heart, as we're all concerned with this question of how to bring about change. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much, Dat, for your talk. I'm going to ask you a few questions related to most of our audience today, which are HR professionals. I really personally appreciate you bringing us to this other rhythm of being, you know. We're so used to be running every day, so I want to thank you for bringing us to a different space of reflection. And I'm going to ask you some questions, we can talk about how can we bring this conscious evolution concept to our daily lives, and especially to the work in HR, which are people working for people, you know?
Exactly.
How can we do that?
Sí, es una pregunta muy bien. It's a very good question. here, when we created the first mindfulness program in the corporation, it was the fourth or fifth biggest corporation in France, where we train about 3,000 employees in 25 different cities. The question is exactly the question that we have been trying to contemplate together, is this question of well-being. Well, what is well-being for the individual, for the company? And what I try to propose is the wisdom that I had learned when I was a monk, because I had lived my life as a monastic for many years, practicing mindfulness. Mindfulness is this form of practice that we can use now in the secular world. There's over 16,000 studies of mindfulness now done, and what we can see through a meta-analysis is this practice. It helps you to have attentional control, which means that you can manage your thinking, first of all. The second is emotional regulation. That means you can manage different affective states of stress. And the third one is you have more of an awareness of yourself, which just means the landscape of your body, of your emotions, of your thinking. And this is a very revolutionary, because it's for the first time we have access to these wisdom. I think we have been living a long time in our society without this wisdom. And this is one of the causes of imbalance. So what I try to do concretely is we integrate mindfulness program in these companies to measure the well-being of the employees first and the group. And this can all be measured now also in different tests and questionnaire, where you can see concrete changes. In French we call this psychosocial prevention.
Yeah.
Yeah, because many companies in France, people are leaving work, there's burnout, many work leave. And as human resources, one of the questions we have to answer is, what is a healthy work environment? So that's, for me, the first step. There's many different steps, but I think already if we arrive at the step, we can see many changes in employees. When I traveled to 25 different cities in France, sharing the practice with a team of 5 teachers, for example, only with 1 day of training, you see many changes in the individuals. There was one lady that was living in the city of Valence, where I had to travel to. I came back the next year, and it was in a big supermarket she works in, and somebody came up to smile at me, and I didn't know who it was because I trained so many employees. But she said, I took your training last year and I wanted to thank you. And this is only just 1 day, we're learning the foundation. And I asked her, why do you want to thank me? She said, that day I came home, I made the decision to reduce the drugs, because we take a lot of drugs to reduce our suffering in society.
Yeah.
And she said, ever since then, I've been finding other healthier solutions, and I feel so much better about myself. And imagine this person, she's feeling good about herself, how it affects her family, how it affects her work group, how it affects her country. It has very deep impact that we can actually measure if we can. And I think that's the first step to integrate programs. Mindfulness programs are not expensive. That's the advantages. And if it's supported by a corporation, you can see the corporation have more well-being, if you will. And the second thing that I try to explore now is, because what I'm interested in is what produces ill-being. As a human resources, we're in a company, and our company produces products. Yes? But our products can sometimes be a detriment to the employees, it could be a detriment to the environment, and it could be a detriment to the earth, to the people around us. And we see this croissance, this growth, exponential growth that we see that's just cracking the system or cracking the individual. And this is everywhere. I travel everywhere for work, America, Europe. I haven't been to South America yet.
You have to come here now.
So I
You're
would like
invited.
to study. I would like to study this ground because I think there's a common ground because we live in this global world where everything is accelerating. And I think if we don't come back to different fundamental ways of beings, then we're just gonna fall off a precipice. It's like the horse and the man on the horse I was sharing. So the last thing I try to share is more, it's linked to systemic changes or holistic changes, structural changes, and how do we apply different principles now within the company or within the group to evolve consciously. For example, there are 7 principles that we try to develop. The first is direction, sense. Sometimes it's very hard to make a difficult decision because everyone has a different view in a society, in a group. Just imagine how hard it is to make a decision at the governmental level with so much different perspective. This is what I share. If your company has a certain direction already, a view, for example, with ecology, I accompany a director that wants 0 carbon by 2035 in his company. He wants to reduce 0 carbon. But that's like a bottom-up, top-up view where everyone adheres to this view. And I think that's a very beautiful aspiration because you see you can grow, but it's not at the detriment of the tragedy of the commons.
Right.
Is always going to be a detriment to somebody, our happiness, you know? I try to apply this even as an individual level as a father. For example, some of us are very busy, and one of the fracture of our society happens within the family. Many children are not cared for nowadays because our parents have to work, and that without this care for our children is like a plant. Imagine if you leave a plant in the room all day in the dark, how would the plant produce fruits or not? And I try to see how I manage my time also, even though I have a center, I work, but my time with my children is also precious as my time going somewhere else. And this is what I try to share is really this spirit in the Zen tradition that our life should not be fragmented into different pieces, but our life is a totality. And when we see life in the totality, we have a very correct view of reality. And so in terms of the human resources, we can ask some things that I think we can ask ourselves is what would we like to produce instead of the products we produce. For example, here at our center, we have a center, hundreds of people come a year, we have a team, we have residents here. But I said we not only produce financial, economic production, or we're not trying to produce the retreats that we offer, but what we try to produce is something much more precious for me. I always look at the end of the day or at the end of life, what's sort of the most important thing? And for me, it's like, am I happy? Do I love what I do? Am I running after time? Do I appreciate simple things? And it's how to produce, we say, the essence of happiness, which for me is in the human heart. And how do we, as structures, as a family, as a group, as an institution, how do we now find new paradigms to integrate within our now our capitalistic framework, which is, I think there's a lot of restructuring to do.
Yeah,
restructuring,
retraining ourselves.
Yeah. And I think the new generation, the new HR managers, the new companies, the new people who wants to usher into the new paradigm, this is sort of the challenge of our time.
Yeah. I liked a question that you asked is, what produces ill-being? And I would like to ask this final question so we can end this. How does mindfulness and all this new perspective relate with the negative emotions and the pain and the suffering and what produces that? I think sometimes we misinterpret what, like the way it is. It's not to ignore the bad things that are happening, but address them in a different way, right? How can you enlighten us as to how to relate with these negative things that happen every day?
Yeah, thank you for posing this question, because mindfulness is not about being happy all the time. As a human being, we suffer. As a human being, we say, even in psychology, we may go through maybe too deep depression in life, with loss, with grief. And I myself have gone through different forms of trauma and depression as an immigrant, as somebody who's lost their family, and somebody who's lost their country also, their culture. But there's very deep suffering. And mindfulness is not only the art of happiness, but we say the art of how to suffer. Many of us, we don't know how to suffer. Many of us, when we suffer, we repress the suffering, or now we just express the suffering. And I read this poem because for me it's very important, because Neruda, he talks about different wars. There's many different wars in society and within the self. And from my experience, when you drop a bomb, it's very difficult to go back. That means the destruction has been done. We need to reconstruct, we need to begin anew, we need to reconciliate. But mindfulness is about embracing. Because one of the quality of mindfulness is, how do I look at something, but beyond my judgments, beyond my knowledge? How do I look at something in a very pure way, beyond my subjectivity? Is that possible? And we say, when we meet suffering in this way, there's only really one response to suffering. We all know this. It's not something that even, I think, mindfulness can teach us. Like I said, mindfulness, it just connects us fundamentally to the human heart. In the Zen tradition, we say when the right hand, if he does like some bricolage, some handiwork, in my right hand holds a nail and my left hand holds a hammer, and all of a sudden the other hand, he hits the right hand, there's suffering, right? So, but my right hand will not blame the suffering on my left hand. My right hand will not say, "Oh, you're very ignorant, you're very stupid, look how you caused me suffering." And my left hand will not judge or blame the right hand. It will not say, "It's your fault because you weren't careful enough. You didn't move enough." Yeah. But the normal instincts of our intelligence is this hand, naturally, it will come and it takes care of the other hand. Yeah? And like I said in my sharing, we need new views for the new world. We cannot use old views that were maybe useful at some point in our society, but are not useful anymore. And for me, the correct view of reality, which aligns with quantum physics, with ecology, is this nature of interdependence, of what we call interbeing, that everything is connected. And it's only our psychological boundaries that prevents us from seeing this. So the deep practices of mindfulness, it comes to the point where it helps us to deconstruct our own view of ourselves and reality, which means that I'll just close with a quote from Einstein, Albert Einstein. He said, our job as human beings is to see that there's an optical illusion that we're separate from the universe. And our job is to open the circle of compassion, to widen the circle of compassion beyond our group, because our group is very survival instincts, beyond our nation, because our nation is always a detriment of other nation, so it can embrace the whole universe. So I think our time is inviting us to have a global-centric view of life and applying it in a very local way. Mm-hmm. I think this is if you're an HR manager, these are things we can look at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Okay, so I want to thank you for joining us today. It's been really great talking to you and listening to everything you have to show us. Thanks for sharing your wisdom. And so we will continue with the rest of our Congress now. So have a very nice day.
Thank you. May you all be well.
You too.
Muchas gracias.
Gracias a ti.